Hello, my name is Dr. Omar Khalif, and I am the Director of Collections and Senior Curator at Sharjah Art Foundation here in the UAE. When the exhibition opened in Hamburg, I felt that it was momentous because it was the largest presentation of the Sharjah Art Foundation Collection, but it also wasn't at home where it usually lives and breathes. Sharjah was on view and on display, and to do that we created a very specific scenography. But what would it mean to think back to part 2, to a second chapter, to imagine the collection at home? In Sharjah, I gave the exhibition the subtitle, The Diasporic Imagination Rises, to suggest an act of homecoming. Here, unlike in Hamburg, where an architecture needed to be built for the works, here in Sharjah, where the works are at home, I wanted to respond to the specificity of the architecture of Al Murayja Square's galleries. Galleries that were built upon the footprints of heritage houses. Galleries that are climate controlled, but they're also famously known for their unusual shape and form, for walls that aren't necessarily straight, for ceilings that vary in height, but all of those things speak to what makes this place unique. Bearing in mind the context of these galleries, I decided to reformulate the exhibition's themes so that each gallery, from galleries 1 to 6 in Al Murayja, could have its own distinct thematic, so that if you're a visitor, you can come and literally enter just one gallery, leave and have felt like you've seen an entire exhibition, that you've captured a slice of the holdings of the collection, but also be able to engage with just one perspective. Gallery 1 is entitled Architecture by Other Me. Here we see figures from Lubaina Hamid to Ahmed Muhammad Ibrahim, Hassan Sharif, Anwar Jalal Shamza, and numerous others, working with figures and form, what you might call abstractions, or are they? The starting point of thinking about that space was literally geometry, the idea of circles and squares. So as you first enter to your left, you see a circle, then you see a square, you see a circle. Why? Because those are the founding blocks through which art and its history are often narrated and made, are through the shapes, contours of the form of an object. But then you bring in color, you bring in detail, you bring in material and specificity. And indeed, when we think of modern and contemporary art, when we think of the avant-garde, we often think of abstraction, with, for example, Kazimir Malevich and the Black Square, for example. So I wanted to actually think about how artists use these abstractions, these lines and these curvatures to create works that actually can be situated within the frame of a canvas, but also that can emerge from the canvas to become literally physical architecture, creating borders and barriers that literally inflect your entire world with questions, with color, different kinds of meaning. Gallery 2 in Al Murayja Square is themed and anchored around the idea of the salon. And the reason for this is that many of the artists, indeed the signature artists that define this space, were mostly women who didn't work on easels, who didn't have massive studios, but actually often worked and made their art on tables, in domestic spaces and spheres. Essentially, she too, once she'd finished a painting, would put away her materials and then go to writing. And then I found in my mind, in the index that is my mind, a work in our collection by Lubaina Hamid, which is actually a repurposed dresser in which she's painted all the different drawers. And I thought to myself, this pretty much is equidistant between the size of Etel's work table, and Selwa's work table. So I put that as a kind of anchoring centerpiece. And then as you turn around the corner, you actually can enter into the domestic world of Etel Adnan in a film by Joanna Hajjatoman Khalil that actually enters you into the scope of her imagination. As you approach the courtyards from Gallery 2 to Gallery 3, you will be confronted by a sculpture by the artist Rushdie Anwar. Before that, you may have been greeted by the sculpture of a rocket. The courtyards in Murayja Square are linked by public works of art that rarely ever get to be seen. This is a privilege that we get to do here in Sharjah, is to bring out these works again into these spaces. The sculpture by Rushdie Anwar, as you might notice, doesn't have a face, which tells us a lot about the context of Gallery 3, which I've called and titled Faces in the Crowd, Portraits Reclaimed. Using the expanse of the peripheral gallery as my kind of seat of imagination, or as a kind of inspiring anecdotal point to kick off from, and then clicked another connection with the work of Namjoon Paik, a recent acquisition of one of his most iconic works, which was first seeded in his imaginary and released to the world in 1974, of his TV Buddha, where we literally see a Buddha in a continuous loop, self-documenting itself with a camera, but also we may see ourselves from the courtyard outside or from the expanse inside the galleries themselves. That work by Namjoon Paik TV Buddha is as much about portraiture as it is about the fracturing of the portrait. And one of the things about being diasporic, or indeed of being of multiple places, is that we often forget who has the right to constitute our portrait and what forms and tools can we use. So what I sought to do in this space is to literally bring together portraits across multiple generations, literally 3 different generations in time, and to look at the formal aspects that link together these works to tell a collective history, if you will, of how artists can reclaim the right to their own image. Gallery 4 is perhaps one of the most enchanting or illuminating of the galleries, because as you enter, you see a spotlight on a sculpture by Mashek Gaba, but then it's really dark. And again, I'm going back to the idea of circles and squares, in the sense that this gallery is anchored by 2 major works. One by Joanna Hajjatoman Khalil called The Golden Record, and the other by the German artist Lothar Baumgarten called Unsettled Objects from 1968 to 69. And they are both circular works. One a slide carousel projection, and the other a projection from above of a giant golden record. As you enter, you hear these sounds of a pan-Arab ideal, sounds of speeches, sounds of music that speak to a culture and a place, but don't actually very much reflect the contours and confines of the space that you're in. The heart of this room is what I call an exploration into wayward ethnography, which is why this chapter is called Interstellar Lives, a Wayward Ethnography. Chapter 5, which is in Gallery 5, is anchored around the title and theme of trace mapping. As you enter, there are 2 fields of vision. A painting by Tala Madani, Corner Projection, Panic. It's a painting made in oil, but look at the figures escaping and the contours of those figures, which at first might resemble minute dots, abstractions, and you might think that that's actually RGB color tones. There's an illusory interplay. There is a sense of humor, but also a sense of expanding the topography of medium expanding the topography of space and time, which is what happens as your eyes flip to the end, to this large picture by Andrzej Gursky of what also seem to be minute dots, traces that need to be mapped, traces on a map. But as you approach that image across the expanse of another map by Marwan Rishmawi, which you can actually walk over, you realize that these are bodies in motion, bodies that are in a performance. If you look above, you might see another map that reveals itself as a cyanotype. If you look down to the ground, you might see another map which is made out of stone by masons. If you take flight and venture upstairs, you might see another cartography, one that takes you out into the imaginary of outer space, into asylum, one that takes you on an imagined route from Sharjah to Ljubljana, or another map into an archaeology in Lebanon, in the work of Akram Zatari. Through the traces that are left to us in the works by these artists, we're able to actually create a sense of a world that truly can be entirely our own. The exhibition closes in Gallery 6, which is an exhibition space that I love for its intimacy, but also for its incredible proximity to this closed and enclosed courtyard almost. You cannot but hear the sounds of a memorial to lost words by Bani Abi. You venture and you turn around these, what are they, an architecture? And you see these slabs of marble that contain what transpire to be letters. Letters that, as you read them, seem to be ones of hope, of longing, of despondency. This is a work that actually connects so many aspects of the exhibition, which is about what does it mean to correct history and to correct collective memory. It's a work that speaks to the individuals from what was then India who served in the First World War. Correspondence engraved in marble that I've chosen to take and lean against walls at time to suggest potentially a tombstone, but also a celebration of those lives. As the sound takes over you, you're also confronted with text that I've authored that gives you a kind of code, a key if you wish, to how to enter the exhibition. But then as you exit, there's a work by the artist Muhammad Kazim, which is literally an entire shelf rack, 4 keys that are entirely empty, except for one that's just a little bit of squint, or indeed askew. So planning an exhibition involves a lot of practicalities, but within the space of those practicalities, there's no reason why you can't be imaginative and creative as well. And that's what I always try and seek to do, and what I've tried, or what I hope I've been able to do with this short story of the exhibition, is to allow us all to understand that the materials that an artist uses, the pigment that they choose to use, is important for us to know as individuals, whether we trained as artists or not, the kind of brush, because all of these things can then influence and inflect the space. And indeed, it made these blues, the blues of my laptop, the blues of my pencil case or wallet or sunglasses, that is a coincidence that is my favorite color. But how perfect that my favorite color led to the perfect metaphor to think about the diasporic imagination. And I hope that you find your perfect color in these walls, that you find an artwork, an adventure, a trajectory all your own, to be able to enter into the heart of another country.